So anytime we do a video on this topic, I always have to include the disclaimer because it's true. I'm not anti-EV. I personally have no problem with the concept of using batteries and electric motors to power vehicles for transportation, for work, for any use where it's appropriate, for any use where it's desired. In certain circumstances, I could see myself owning and having fun with an electric powered vehicle. So we need to get that square right off the bat. I'm not anti-EV. What I am is anti-idiocy. And it appears to me that the EV revolution that started about 3 years ago, well, I mean, obviously, it's been in the works for a lot longer than that, but the big push started about 3 years ago or so, corresponding with a very big health crisis. A coincidence? I don't know. But the big push started about 3 years ago. And right away, I could see the flaws in the basic plan. The number one flaw is that the world that we live in, the whole world that we live in, everything that we use, every place we live, and the networks involved are all based around the capabilities of the internal combustion engine. In the 1800s, you had the expansion across the continent. Well, let's not talk about just the United States. Let's talk about the world. In the 1800s, you had the expansion of societies based on the capabilities of the steam locomotive. How far can you get in a day? About 100 miles. I know all your major cities are 100 miles apart from each other, give or take. In the 20th century, it became the internal combustion engine. And the world was built around the capabilities of the internal combustion engine. And in this case, you can go anywhere, anytime, conveniently. Everything we know today, the way we live, the way we work, the things we consume, everything is based on the capabilities of the internal combustion engine. The EV is different. It has a different set of capabilities. And in most cases, that set of capabilities is not compatible with the way we live. Can there be an EV revolution? Absolutely. But it's not something you can force. It's not something you can push down the people's throat to happen in a short period of time. It has to be an evolution, not a revolution. And if the right set of circumstances are put in place over the next 25 to 50 years or so, I could very easily see society changing, the world changing, our ways of thinking and living changing to make the EV the choice of vehicle. And I don't really want to get into the politics of things. But like, for instance, you take, for example, the concept of a 15-minute city. I know this is going to sound crazy, especially coming from somebody who's as traditional as I am. I love the concept of a 15-minute city. When I moved from New York City to Tennessee, I specifically looked for a location where everything I need or would want would be within that 15-minute, 20-minute or so range. It was my choice. I chose to come to a place where things are that accessible. Now, if it was the law, if it was the rule that I had to relocate to a place or I had to be confined to a place where I could only go within a 15-minute range or I would be, penalized in some way, well, then no, absolutely not. My free will says I want to live in a convenient area. Everything should be within 15, 20 minutes. Common sense. Well, it's the way it's always been for all of human history. That's why we have cities, because you want things in a central kind of location. But you can't force the people to live like that. See, that's where I have the problem. It's where the government and the corporations combine. Well, there was a word for that. There used to be a name for that. And for the life of me, I can't remember what it was. But yeah, it's when the government and the corporations combine to force the will of the people. If you could think of the name of that type of system, put it in the comments. So, over the last 3 years, since the EV thing, really, the revolution got started in all of the automakers and everybody just climbed on the bandwagon. Yes, no more internal combustion engines. We're going all in on the EV deal. Man, a lot has happened. A lot has changed. And it appears to me that the EV revolution has reached peak idiocy and is kind of now in retreat. And this is a good thing. And again, it's not because I'm down on EVs. Yes, I'm a traditionalist. My life is internal combustion engines. The only thing I love more than internal combustion engines is common sense, right? So follow along. 3 years ago, during this frenzy, this EV conversion frenzy, the media, everybody's trying to shove it down our throats. EV this, EV that. And they went so far as to take Project X. And I did a video called The Most Vile Thing I've Ever Seen Done with an Automobile. They took Project X and converted it to be an EV. Man, the outrage was, of course, while it was being done, it's like, oh, this is the future. This is what everybody wants. This is the thing. No, the people didn't want it. I didn't want it. The people didn't want it. And over the last couple of months, Project X has been converted back to a proper internal combustion engine. Peak idiocy in retreat. But there are other things that are happening that are a little bit, much bigger than that. For instance, just this last week, there was another container ship fire. This thing was carrying 500 EVs. And almost 4,000 cars total. These things are so huge, these container ships. Almost 4,000 cars total. 500 of them were EVs. One of the EVs lit off. Once that fire got started, it was grouped with other EVs. You had that thermal runaway deal. And the next thing you know, the ship is a total loss. All 4,000 vehicles, give or take, are a total loss. Unfortunately, this time, a crew member was killed. Now, I say this time because this has happened 3 times in the last 3 years, where container ships carrying EVs have spontaneously combusted and total loss. 10,000 vehicles. 10,000 vehicles. From what I understand, the price tag on the last one, just in vehicle cost, was $500 million. So let's assume you have these 3 container ships, just their cargo going down, right? Because of these fires that are unfightable, uncontrollable. You've had well over $1 billion in losses just in the cargo. Never mind the 3 ships. And then, of course, never mind the poor crew member who lost his life on this last one. And there are several others that are in the hospital with injuries. So when I said this fire was so intense, that they had to abandon ship. Now, these things, it's like a floating city, right? Think about how big something has to be to carry 4,000 cars. This fire was so intense, the crew members they surveyed the landscape and it says, you know what, we're better off in the water than being on top of this thing. They couldn't find a place safe enough to be on top of this. Not only that, but the fumes. What is the environmental impact of dropping all of those cars, all of those ships into the water? What is the cost to the shipping companies? What is the cost to the insurance companies? What is the cost to the automakers that lost this cargo? These numbers are astounding. They're huge, huge numbers. And then you get Ford. So just this last week, Ford said that in 2022, they lost $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion. This is a company. This isn't a country, okay? They lost $2.5 billion on EVs. This year, they're on track to lose $4.5 billion. $4.5 billion. This is one company on EVs. But yet the idiocy continues. They keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. Then you got China, right? So China, and not talking about anything else, not talking about politics or world events, but let's just talk about China and EVs. So China is boasting, or somebody is boasting for China, that China leads the world in EV sales. And they have the numbers to back it up. And it's growing all the time. But if you do a quick search right now, while they're still available, you'll find that there are videos online now that show fields of cars, all identical electric vehicles. Most of them are white. Fields of these things, literally, for as far as the eye can see, all EVs. Now, I guess that wouldn't be unusual if you're producing a huge number of electric vehicles and you need to store them before they get shipped off to dealers. The problem is all of these cars, and there's the videos showing the plates, all of these cars have license plates. They all have tags. They've all been sent through whatever motor vehicle system that China has, and they've been assigned as being sold. They have license plates on them. So through what mechanism is China producing all of these cars and then registering them as sold and then parking them in these fields? Even in China, people don't seem to want these cars. But the propaganda machine, whether it's from the government itself or the corporations involved or, I don't know, any type of world sort of organization, the propaganda machine keeps pumping this stuff hard. People don't want them. They don't want them because they don't fit their lifestyles. It's not that, like, I don't have an EV, not because I'm against EVs. I don't have an EV because it doesn't fit my lifestyle. If I happen to live in an area or had the type of life where an EV was convenient or fun, well, I mean, they are fun, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I'd have one. I have no problem with electric vehicles. And then you've got Chrysler now. Chrysler, Stellantis, right? You've got Chrysler. This last week, they discontinued the Hemi. No more Hemi. No more internal combustion engine. Or no more high-performance internal combustion engines. It's going to be high-performance EVs. And we saw this electric charger concept with the fake sounds that it makes. More corporate suicide. More corporate suicide. And that's kind of odd because it's the corporations and the government that have kind of gotten together. Let's not get into that. But it's more corporate suicide. You know, how much money is that company going to lose now? Because the Hemi engine was such a huge motivator for Dodge car sales. Gone now. Now it's going to be electric vehicles. They think that the people who buy Teslas for performance purposes are going to switch over to Dodge, and that is not going to happen. And then Tesla with the price cuts, because they're not selling as many as they should. Now, the thing about Tesla, there's a lot of things that I don't agree with as far as their business model goes, because, again, see, I'm old school, I'm traditional. If I buy a car, I want to be able to service it myself. If I get into a fender bender, I'm going to talk about that in a second. If I get into a fender bender, I want to be able to change the parts myself. I want to be able to fix it myself. If the radio doesn't work, I want to be able to swap in a new unit or however it's configured. I want control of my own vehicle. And Tesla doesn't see it that way. It's like, no, we don't sell parts. You break it, you got to bring it back to us. So I disagree with that part of the business model, but I don't disagree with the machinery. There is no denying Teslas are effective. They work. They're well, from a performance standpoint, they're fast, blindingly fast, and they're practical. They're used every day by everyday people. But the way the world is currently set up, there's only really room for one company like Tesla that it features the electric cars. And even they're having problems. But now let's talk about other problems. So now the insurance companies are seeing the problem with EVs. And one of the big problems is battery damage, potential battery damage, and the potential for disaster once a battery has been damaged. So you have these vehicles now that are getting into relatively minor accidents, just a little bit beyond a fender bender, right? But not quite where it's totaled. And now the battery comes into question because during that impact, was the battery internally damaged enough so that it can fail, it can have one of those notorious fires that are almost impossible to put out, tens of thousands of gallons of water. And so the insurance companies are starting to find that these cars that have had accidents are requiring battery replacements. And there was recently a story about a guy with a Rivian truck that had an accident. And the cost of repairing this car from the accident was over $45,000. The damage should have been like $5,000, if it was a typical car. But they had to replace the battery pack and everything else because this stuff came into question now, right? Is this thing going to be safe to send out into the world, or 2-3 weeks from now where it hits a bump or whatever and the internal parts start to fizz out to each other and next thing you know, it's gone. So like, the cost of repairing the car for this, the truck for this relatively minor accident was half the cost of the truck. It was like $45,000. This is insanity. The insurance companies, and this gets passed on to everybody, because the same insurance company that's paying out for the claims for these EVs is also paying out for your homeowners insurance, and it's the same company. So it affects everybody across the board, even if it's not just the rates for cars. And of course, you've got the fire departments, and it's like they're still trying to like work out how do you deal with these things once they light off. So they've got procedures, and they've got containment devices, and they've got, and in a lot of situations, it's like, well, you just got to let it burn out, which is what they're doing with these container ships. Once they fire up, once those things light off, there's no putting it out. You literally have to just let it burn itself out. Now, there are videos of them with ships, fire ships, hosing down the sides of these things so that the hull doesn't like just fracture and the whole thing go down just like that. There's no putting out the fire, so it's going to pump all of those toxins into the air. But to keep the thing from sinking, they've got to keep the sides of the ship relatively cool while they let the fire burn out. Yeah, you see, well, this isn't good, right? There's a lot of things that are not good about this. I could go on, because there's so many instances now of, and even with the electric bikes, people are getting. It was recently an accident in New York City where an electric bike was being charged in this guy's house, and the thing caught fire while he was sleeping and killed him. Yeah, you see, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of problems, and those problems are really starting to come to the surface now. But I do have a basic solution. I have a basic solution for anybody who would choose to listen. The powers that be. You want the EVs to become, you want the world to reinvent itself to favor the electric vehicle. You have a foothold. You have a percentage of the population, 5%, even 10%, whatever it is, of the population who are willingly adopting EVs. They're doing it for economical purposes, although the long-term economics is another thing, battery replacement and so on and so forth. But there are segments of the population who do love their EVs. They're practical for these people. They want them. And then you've got enthusiasts. You've got the Tesla enthusiasts. They love their Teslas. They love their EVs. They're out there having fun with them. They're driving them as daily transportation. They're racing the things. There's a whole cult built around the Tesla. Well, instead of trying to force this conversion, this revolution down an unwilling public's throat, and if you want to see how unwilling people are, look at some of the posts on social media. Whenever one of the manufacturers says, "Oh, we're going to be releasing the new BMW blah 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 electric," or whatever it is, the new electric car, read the comments. Read the comments. There's thousands of comments, and all of them are like, "You can shove that thing. I got no use for that. Go away." So instead of trying to force the public to adopt these things, in a world that isn't ready to make that change, why not just play on the strong points? Why not offer small practical EVs for people who live in cities, get the fire problem under control, but offer small practical EVs for people who use these things in the way that they work best. On the flip side, feature the performance of them, because nothing can beat the performance of an EV. Well, okay, you go to the end of the rainbow, you're talking about like top fuelers and stuff. Yeah, the EV's got a long way to go from that. But as far as like the capabilities of a normal car, nothing can top what an EV is currently capable of. Play up on that. Build that enthusiast base. And of course, there are people who, for whatever reason, want to try to use an EV as their regular everyday car and replace the internal combustion engine. And for those people, the choice is theirs, and they should be able to make it, and it should be available to them. If instead of trying to force a revolution and jam this stuff down the public's throat, you just played up on the strong points and marketed to those people who are willingly, enthusiastically embracing the EV, well, if you just focused on that, you would get the revolution that you want, but it would just take a little bit longer. It's not going to happen in 2030 or 2030, and these states that ban internal combustion engines as of it's lunacy. It's more suicide. It's more economic suicide. So you've got corporate suicide, and now you've got governmental suicide in these various states and areas and regions that are no more internal combustion engines after such and such a date. It's lunacy. It's lunacy. But I think the general public is starting to wake up, and I see the pushback is starting, and that pushback is healthy. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a place in the world for the EV. And at some point, the EV very well may take over and become the vehicle of choice. But it's a long, long road between here and there. Take the baby steps, move it along, and play to the strong points. Forget about this jamming it down the world's throat. It doesn't work that way. All right. Enough ranting about this stuff. There's so much more. I'm not going to get into it now. Maybe we'll revisit this in a couple of weeks. I'll see you tomorrow.